It's time now for this. Yes, it's time for Uncancelled, in which we examine the dark underbelly of the news agenda. For publishing blogs in 2019, critiquing someone on the basis of transgender ideology will get you in trouble. Academic Kathleen Stock was branded transphobic by activists, and protests were organised calling for her to be sacked. Last month, she decided to leave the University of Sussex after 18 years of respected teaching. Now, another professor, Jo Phoenix, is planning to fight Open University for what she says is a lack of protection that her bullying... Let me clear that one up, shall we? Basically, she doesn't feel protected by the Open University. Here to examine what's going on in our universities, supposed to be bastions of free speech and thought, is political commentator and broadcaster Emma Webb. Hi, Emma.
Good evening, Mark.
Great to have you on the show. Emma, do you think that there are now voices in academia who are actually fighting back against this extreme political correctness and, in the case, of course, of that particular academic who has left Sussex University, Kathleen Stock, cancellation?
Well, absolutely. But unfortunately, it seems that these academics are having to fight for academic freedom from outside of their universities. This is obviously quite a significant problem. The Free Speech Union, where I'm the Deputy Research Director, has helped hundreds and hundreds of cases, and a very high number of those cases come from people who have gender critical views and have suffered as a result. And it's quite clear that academics like Kathleen Stock are willing to stand up for their right to academic freedom. And there are many people who are also standing with them, high profile individuals, ministers like Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch, the university's minister, the chair of the EHRC as well, Baroness Faulkner, have stood by Kathleen Stock in what has been this horrendous campaign of intimidation and harassment against her. But as the academic Eric Kaufman has pointed out, this is a censorship that is coming from the bottom up. And so there is new legislation that's being brought in by the government, the Higher Education Free Speech Bill, that is going through at the moment, trying to deal with this problem. But fundamentally, there seems to be a problem at the heart of our universities with censorship, and particularly censorship around gender critical views, as in the case of Kathleen Stock and also now Jo Phoenix.
Absolutely right. Well, let's bring my panel in, if I may. It's a fascinating topic that you've raised, Emma. I'm delighted to have Rebecca, Dominique and Andrew in this conversation. And Andrew, the case of Kathleen Stock has come up plenty of times on your brilliant show, Free Speech Nation.
Well, I think that's because it's a particularly egregious example of what people have been warning around for a long time. I mean, study after study shows that academics with certain viewpoints, let's just say not the high status opinions, not the fashionable opinions, they tend to keep them to themselves because they fear for their career prospects and their promotional prospects if they are honest and open. And actually, Kathleen Stock is a very interesting one because her book, Material Girls, and her writing and speaking on this subject more generally is so placid and calm and compassionate, and is not provocative, and is not out to take away anyone's rights or isn't needlessly isn't attacking people at all. So of all the people they could have gone for, and of all the people they could have demonised and said was hateful, this evil hate figure, it just doesn't bear any relation to reality. I just wonder what Emma thinks about this, is how can we possibly do something about this, given that, as you've pointed out, this is not a top-down form of censorship, it's coming from the grassroots up, and these people are divorced from reality. In other words, it's not so much that we have to persuade them that their viewpoints on this are not acceptable. It's that we have to almost de-radicalise them at this point.
I think, Andrew, you're absolutely right. And the situation with Kathleen Stock is so egregious just because of the levels of harassment and intimidation that she's experiencing from these black-clad Antifa appearing protesters, the sorts of things that they've been posting around campus. And the same with Jo Phoenix. You know, these are academics who are experiencing extreme distress because of the protests that are being, well, not just simply protests, but it's sort of straightforward harassment against them. And it is very difficult to deal with because the university, in the case of the University of Sussex, they've since come out saying that they would have protected her freedom of speech and her academic freedom. But it's quite clear that they have done that now because they're in a position where they're feeling essentially embarrassed into it. And it's a little bit too late, given that this has been going on for 3.5 years. This, as she says, low-level bullying and intimidation. And I mentioned Eric Kaufman already. Eric Kaufman was part of a study that Policy Exchange did around academic freedom and the lack of viewpoint diversities in universities. And it seems that really the only hope at this point is to legislate, which is what the government are trying to do with the Higher Education Free Speech Bill. But fundamentally, this needs to be a cultural change within universities themselves. And whilst I think it's excellent that there are people like Joe Phoenix, who has now raised £80,000 crowdfunded to take the Open University to an employment tribunal, it's going to take academics like Kathleen Stock and Joe Phoenix to speak out about this from outside of universities. But fundamentally, the change is going to have to come from the academics within these institutions somehow. But it is a very, very difficult conundrum to attempt to solve.
Have you yourself in your career as a fantastic commentator in broadcast and in print had any pushback for the views that you've extolled, Emma?
Not particularly, though I have to admit that the times when I've been most, shall we say, heavily criticised or attacked has been when I have expressed views that I suppose would be described as broadly gender critical, which is simply the idea that it's not possible to change your biological sex, which I think is a view that most people around the country would hold. And usually, actually, whenever I've had the most sort of vicious responses, it has been in response to that kind of thing, instead of what you would imagine my work on Islamist extremism, which has had much less pushback.
Yes, I mean, Dominique, I think some of the language around this is an issue. The idea that you're gender critical for pointing out that there are two biological sexes, I mean, that's not gender critical, that's gender factual, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally just common sense, but it seems that, you know, as time goes by, as a society, we're just becoming more and more removed from reality, where it's taboo to actually state these facts, and it's constituted as an attack on trans people when it's not. I mean, I was called a transphobe for saying, you know, there is male and there is female, and that's obviously just a fact. And I think more specifically in terms of the university, surely, you know, being gender critical as, you know, it's a protected view now, surely the government should perhaps be pushing for universities to take more of a strong-willed approach in regards to the people harassing academics that take a different view. I think people should be expelled, they should be reprimanded. Instead of just posting tweets, which the University of Sussex did, I think people actually do need to be punished, because it cannot be right that a professional is forced out of her job and essentially smeared for having views that are rooted in scientific facts. I actually just can't believe it's happening in our society.
The issue you've got is, yes, you're right there to say, Emma, that these individuals that are, you know, jobless now should speak out without fear of censure or cancellation. But they've been cancelled, haven't they? So doesn't that tell us that we're losing the war on woke?
Well, it's certainly not a very good sign. And I think actually, just to speak up to what Dominique was saying there, that Kathleen Stock has made it quite clear that it's not actually just students. Actually, it's her colleagues, it's other academics that are really at the forefront of this. And in that instance, you know, universities need to hold those individuals to account for sort of stomping all over the academic freedom and the free speech of their own colleagues. And this is something that this new legislation is going to attempt to do, which is to give academics and students the ability to even potentially sue universities, to hold those universities to account when they fail to live up to their statutory duties to protect freedom of speech and academic freedom. And it seems to be at least the first step in dealing with the issue, because then at least it will open up the possibility of debate, because under the current circumstances, the lack of diversity of thought, the monoculture, so as you would say, of peer pressure, means that these conversations can't even happen. So academics like Kathleen Stock, like Joe Phoenix, will very likely be receiving messages, emails from other colleagues, as many other academics have done, saying, I agree with you on this, but I can't say anything because I am up for promotion, or because I have, children, a family, my situation is precarious, or because they're a student themselves. And so because of their concern for their career, they can't speak out about this. Whereas if there was legislation to ensure that universities have to have freedom of speech and academic freedom at the heart of their institutions, then at least those conversations would be possible and debates could take place that would allow the sort of counterfactual or more extreme views to be busted in some way. Because at the moment it seems that these ideas have really become so deeply entrenched within the universities that they can't even be argued against.
Well, that's right, but this is very systemic, it seems, within a lot of our institutions and corporations. As I mentioned in yesterday's monologue, there are people in workplaces who are afraid to admit that they are Conservative supporting or that they backed Brexit. There are scientists afraid to criticise lockdowns or other COVID measures, even though they take the view that it's not the correct policy. So you do wonder whether this is somewhat cultural. I mean, Rebecca, what's your view on this?
I think the important thing that we should say is that the vast majority of trans people are not this kind of person.
Correct.
They
well said.
Live a quiet and respectful life, or a loud and noisy life, but they don't live a life where they attack people. They just get on with their life. They use the bathroom that's right for them. They drive their car. They have cats and dogs. They are normal people. Yeah. A small number of trans people. And I do think it's really interesting so I have a lot of love for Emma, but we don't agree on very much. But I have the same experience. The worst kickback I've ever had, apart from after spending time debating Milo Yiannopoulos, the second worst trolling I've ever had was when I was being called transphobic. And it does seem that most people I know, unless they actively sort of toe the party line, have been called transphobic. I think things like trans women don't have periods in the same way that cis women do. And that is genuinely controversial in some circles. So I guess my question is, Emma, and I don't know if you can answer this, it's probably a really hard question for anybody to answer, is why do these people, and they believe this so deeply, it's like a religion for them, it's really, really real to them. How did that start? Where did that come from? Why is this their thing? Because, there was an anti-Semitic professor at the University of Bristol. Everyone was like, I mean, he does hate the Jews, but let's just leave him. Nobody cared. And this woman wrote a book and everyone lost their minds. So why is transphobia the issue that young people seem to care about the most?
I think probably Andrew would be better placed to answer that in intellectual terms, because it has a long history. It could go all the way back to Hegel. There's a long academic, a long intellectual history that has meant that this has really planted itself within universities. But it's also the result of, in the broader context, lobbying groups like Stonewall, who have most of the institutions around the country, everything from the Ministry of Justice until quite recently, and many universities, including the University of Sussex, actually, that are Stonewall diversity champions, who are essentially have their policies dictated to them by this lobby group that started its life as being a group that was campaigning for people who are same-sex attracted, and has now taken on this radical gender ideology, which has really started to put pressure on lots of institutions, and particularly within universities. And actually, Jo Phoenix, the other academic who was cancelled, she's a renowned criminologist. She writes about vulnerable women within the justice system. So she's particularly concerned about safeguarding issues when it comes to female prisoners who are imprisoned alongside individuals who may be still biologically male, then haven't legally or physically transitioned into being a trans woman. I'm not sure exactly how to put that. And, she's also been critical of Stonewall, and that's one of the reasons why she's come under fire in this way. And the same goes also for Kathleen Stock. So there is a much larger societal context to why this is the case. And I think it's also to do with like I say, the intellectual roots of this, that gender and sex has become a particular battleground for a particular subset of critical theory. And that is the reason why it seems to be so on fire in universities, I think.
I do worry sometimes that all that feminism I spent all of my late teens and early 20s yammering about may have been part of the problem, because we enjoyed our oppression as well as fighting it, and I do worry that might have possibly had a bit of a negative effect.
Well, yeah, you do wonder. That's an interesting thought that you've posited. Emma, so fascinating as always.